Welcome back to True Crime Documentary, where every story is not just about ordinary murders, but a journey to discover the darkest secrets. Are you ready? As this is the final part, we will not only solve the unanswered questions, but also touch on the biggest question in the Zodiac case. Is he still alive? Do you think we are any closer to the truth? Although this case has lasted for more than 50 years, and many people thought there would never be an answer, today, you will join us closer than ever to the true portrait of this legendary killer. Zodiac Killer. The name has haunted many generations, making many people both afraid and curious about his ghost. Although he was a brutal killer, he was also a master of psychological games. The letters, the codes, the never-ending murders kept people glued to this case. But the question we all wondered was, is the Zodiac still alive, still watching and playing tricks on us from the shadows? Or has he disappeared forever? Let's go back to an unforgettable moment, right in the last days of the 1960s. Every day, the American public lived in fear and obsession because of this invisible killer. The murders had strange similarities, and every time a new victim was found, a new letter was sent to major newspapers, taunting the police and challenging society. The cryptic codes he sent made cryptographers have their heads broken, and the police could only try to decipher them without knowing where to stop. But then, one fateful day, when everyone thought the case was over, Zodiac sent another letter. And this time, it wasn't just a threat or a joke. It was a declaration of the dark plots he was still carrying out. The challenge was even more obvious, and everyone, from the public to the police, felt as if they were living in a game they couldn't escape. But for a long time, after decades of investigation, have we really found the answer? Is Zodiac dead? Or is he still alive and continuing to toy with those who hunt him? So, is Zodiac still alive? In Zodiac Killer, is he still alive? True Crime Documentary, Part 5. We will explore new theories, unsolved clues, and investigations that never stop. Follow us, and you may be surprised by the never-before-revealed details about this legendary killer. Keep following, because the story of Zodiac never ends. As the summer of 1969 gradually passed, the name Zodiac Killer was no longer a haunting for not only the victims' families, but also for American society. No one could stop thinking about him. The one who created brutal murders, left strange traces at the crime scenes, and sent provocative letters to the newspapers. Each letter, each code, was just a terrible game that made the public more and more afraid, and investigators were constantly scratching their heads because of the unsolvable mystery. But the biggest question, still the question that no one could answer accurately, is Zodiac still alive? The police have found many suspects, but every time they feel closer to the truth, everything eludes them like darkness. Time passes, and each new letter is a challenge. That is the game that Zodiac started and continues to tear society apart. Since the first murders occurred in 1968, the name Zodiac has become a symbol, not only of horror, but also of the incompetence of the investigative agencies and the authorities. Zodiac is not just a killer. He is a game player, a clever one, and a ruthless one. He knows how to make himself a legend, a ghost that the police cannot touch. Every time he kills, he not only satisfies his hunger, but also challenges the entire legal system, leaving the police exhausted and hopeless. His letters were not just threats, but a psychological confrontation where he constantly manipulated people, forcing them to play his game. And over the next few years, each letter was a new provocation, an unsolved puzzle, a step that kept the police from getting any closer to catching him. He was a monster whose every attempt to catch him only made him more skillful. He was no ordinary killer, but one who toyed with life and death. When the first Zodiac letters appeared in July 1969, everyone thought they were just the meaningless threats of a killer who wanted to be famous. But when the second letter arrived, and then the third, confusion set in. The number of letters increased. The Zodiac letters not only talked about murders, but also contained complex codes that even cryptographers had a headache with. The Zodiac knew that, to make his game more interesting, he needed to get people involved in it. And with each letter, each code, he not only created fear, but also sowed doubt and speculation. The police could do nothing but try to decipher those letters. They hoped that in the strange and confusing characters, there would be information that would help them make progress. But even in the 2020s, codes like Z340 remained unsolved, making the Zodiac story even more mysterious. And while the police were racked with unsolved codes, he continued to create new murders, making society more confused and fearful. The public waited for each new letter from Zodiac, each one a provocation. He demanded that the press publish his letters, otherwise, he would continue to kill. And the scariest thing was, the public could not stop reading those letters. Each letter was part of the game he created, and everyone participated in it irresistibly. No one knew what he would do next. With the Zodiac letters continuously being sent, the police were increasingly at a standstill. They began investigating, verifying dozens of suspects, but none of them could be the official culprit. Meanwhile, the letters continued to appear, making everything more ambiguous. Zodiac continued to challenge the police, sending letters full of hidden meanings, unsolvable puzzles. Every time the police felt they were close to a solution, Zodiac would emerge from the shadows, continuing to create difficulties and mysteries. The police used every method of investigation: fingerprint analysis, witness interviews, and even advanced technology to search for any clues that could help them close in on Zodiac. But each time, things took a different turn, and Zodiac still disappeared. Suspects such as Arthur Lee Allen, Richard Gaikowski, Lawrence Kane, and many others were investigated, but no one could confirm that they were the culprit. They all had strange characteristics, but the evidence was too vague to be conclusive. Although there were dozens of suspects, all of them could not answer the most important question: who really was the Zodiac Killer? For each suspect, a series of theories were put forward. Some believed that Zodiac was an ordinary person, an office worker, a quiet person living in the community without anyone suspecting him. Some believed that Zodiac could be a military man, experienced in tactics, and covering his tracks perfectly. Investigators began to come up with theories about Zodiac's motives, about how he could make society fear him without leaving any traces. What made it difficult for the police was that, every time they investigated a suspect, the case returned to the starting point. There were no specific traces, no convincing evidence, and Zodiac was always one step ahead of them. The police could only see the traces, but couldn't. Is Zodiac still alive? Is he dead? Or is he still lurking somewhere, waiting for the right moment to continue his game? In Zodiac Killer, is he still alive? True Crime Documentary, Part 5. We delve into new theories, unsolved clues, and unanswered questions about this legendary killer. Don't miss it. Watch Part 5 and discover the unsolved mysteries of the hunt for the Zodiac Killer. The Zodiac Killer case has been going on for more than 50 years, and during that time, the police have not been able to come up with a definitive answer about this mysterious killer. The murders happened one after another with vague clues, and the letters full of codes sent by him have made all the police's efforts meaningless. But while the case is still unfinished, the biggest question remains: is the Zodiac Killer still alive? No matter how many years have passed, no matter how many theories and suspects there are, this question has never been solved. And this is what makes the Zodiac case one of the most famous and enduring cases in American crime history. Every time a new suspect appears, the police hope that they have found the culprit. But after each time, they face greater disappointment. With each new clue, the case becomes more complicated than ever. Zodiac is not a simple killer. He is a master of psychological games, and every time the police think they are close to a solution, Zodiac appears from the shadows, creating a new game that keeps them going. The Zodiac case has something special that few cases have. Frustration seems to be a part of it. The police keep chasing suspects, testing theories, but all efforts fail. Meanwhile, Zodiac keeps sending provocative letters and mysterious codes. These letters contain not only threats, but also hidden messages that make people rush into the search without being able to escape. The police are not facing an ordinary killer, but one who plays with their wits, making every step they take pointless. Every time they thought they had a clue, Zodiac would throw up a new challenge, a new mystery that would keep them searching endlessly. The shadow of Zodiac grew larger and larger, and when investigators had lost all hope, the unexpected happened. Throughout the investigation, many suspects were brought up, and each one raised unanswered questions. One of the most frequently mentioned names over the years was Arthur Lee Allen, a man who had been linked to several similar cases. Allen had odd behavior and a shady past, which made him one of the most likely suspects. However, despite numerous investigations by the police, there was not enough evidence to conclude that Allen was the Zodiac. They checked fingerprints, interviewed witnesses, but nothing was clear enough to prove that he was the killer. The details of Allen's life, such as his Zodiac-like round watch and previous lawsuits, were not strong enough to convict him. And although Allen was the most popular name, he was never identified as the killer for a long time. Another suspect was Richard Gaikowski, a journalist who worked for the San Francisco Examiner. Gaikowski was said to have been in contact with the Zodiac through letters, and some believed he might be behind the murders. Despite some strange details in Gaikowski's life, there was not enough evidence to conclusively link him to the Zodiac. However, Gaikowski remained a potential suspect that many believed was involved. Other suspects, such as Lawrence Kane and Jack Terrence, were also investigated, but none were conclusively linked to the murders. The details surrounding them were not convincing enough to convict, and so the case continued to fall into a deadlock. Although there were a series of suspects and theories, one factor that could not be ignored in the Zodiac case was the codes. The codes sent by the Zodiac became an unsolvable challenge for decades. Every time the police thought they had solved a part, another code appeared, leaving everyone facing a new question. What made this case special was that the codes were not simply puzzles, but messages that the Zodiac deliberately sent to confuse the police. Each code, each letter was a game created by the Zodiac and the public. The people who followed this case were the ones participating in this game without knowing that they were being manipulated. It was these codes that made the case an unforgettable legend. Each time a code was solved, another question arose, and the letters that followed only added to the confusion, with no one knowing for sure if Zodiac was still alive, if he was still pulling these cruel pranks. The investigation continued, and each time a new suspect emerged, people thought they would find Zodiac. But each time, the case returns to square one. Zodiac continues to kill, continues to send letters and codes, and continues to be an untouchable ghost. Each new clue opens a new path, but leads to a dead end. No matter how many theories are put forward, one thing remains the same. Zodiac remains an uncaught killer. With each new suspect, the investigation becomes more complicated. Was Zodiac truly a lone wolf, or was he part of a criminal gang? Each answer makes things more ambiguous. But so far, no evidence has been strong enough to convict anyone. Zodiac remains at large, and this only adds to the public's obsession with him. So, is Zodiac really alive? What will the police do next in this investigation? Unanswered questions will be answered in Zodiac Killer. Is he still alive? True Crime Documentary, Part 5. Don't miss the chance to continue following the Zodiac case. With years passed, and the Zodiac Killer case showed no signs of closure. The police, after years of racing against time, seemed to have accepted that they were dealing with a killer they could not touch. Suspects emerged, theories were put forward, but none could solve the mystery. The Zodiac, a killer who left no clear traces, continued to keep himself in the dark, manipulating everything and making the investigation a never-ending struggle. In the late 1970s, when it seemed that the Zodiac case would be forgotten, a new clue suddenly appeared. Investigators received a new letter from the Zodiac. Although it was not the first, it still shocked everyone. The code in this letter was unlike the previous codes. It was more difficult, more complex, and seemed to challenge even the most experienced cryptographers. The letter was not merely a challenge, but a reminder that the Zodiac was still there, still out there, waiting. The police could not help but pursue this lead, even though they knew they would probably hit another dead end. But a few new analysts, along with more modern cryptographic tools, began to find strange details in the codes. Some theorized that the Zodiac was deliberately leaving new clues, perhaps as a way to test the patience of the police and the public, to see if they had the patience and talent to crack his code. Meanwhile, investigators continued to look for new suspects. Names like Richard Gaikowski, Arthur Lee Allen, and even Jack Terrence were still being considered. They all had strange characteristics or connections to the cases, but none of them were strong enough to convict. The police were faced with no evidence, no hard evidence, only vague theories. One of the complicating factors in the investigation was the relationship between the suspects. They all had strange similarities, but there was not enough evidence to conclude that they were the Zodiac. There were suspects with previous convictions for similar crimes. There were suspects who lived in the area near the crime scenes, but it was remarkable that none of them could be definitively linked to the murders. One of the most notable was Arthur Lee Allen, who had been under police surveillance for years. Despite the similarity of Allen's description to the Zodiac's features, there was no clear evidence to charge him. Some even suggested that Allen might be the Zodiac, but extensive investigations could not produce a final conclusion. Likewise, Richard Gaikowski, a strange journalist with a reclusive lifestyle and unclear connections, was again a suspect in the investigation. Gaikowski's articles bore some similarities to letters sent to the press by the Zodiac, leading many to believe that he might be the culprit. But like Allen, there was no evidence that Gaikowski was the killer. And then there was Jack Terrence, who initially had no clear connection to the case, but with some new information, the police began to suspect him again. Terrence, a man with a criminal record, had lived in the area near the Zodiac murders, but there was no evidence to conclude that he was the culprit. This ambiguity brought the case back to square one, and the suspicions continued to be unanswered questions. Although the suspects remain unconvicted, and no one has ever been confirmed as the Zodiac, new leads continue to emerge. Recently, some cryptographers and new technology have helped decipher some of the Zodiac letters, giving investigators new leads. This opens up the hope that, despite the case having dragged on for more than 50 years, one day the final clues may finally lead them to the real killer. One of the most important advances in the investigation has been the advent of DNA analysis technology. Although previous tests have not yielded any positive results for the police, with more modern technology, experts hope to be able to find traces of the Zodiac in the evidence left at the scene. However, nothing is certain, and each test leads to new disappointments. Investigators never give up. Every step forward, every clue, no matter how small, gets them closer to the answer. But sometimes those very steps make them feel like they're going in circles in a never-ending struggle. The investigation into the Zodiac Killer is not just a hunt for a killer, but also a never-ending psychological battle. The more they investigate, the more they feel more tired. No one knows if Zodiac is still alive, but if he is, will he continue to commit murders? Or will he forever fade into obscurity, like an untouchable legend? While the clues remain unclear, investigators continue to devote all their efforts to finding Zodiac. They believe that, if not an ordinary killer, Zodiac must have a motive greater than anyone can imagine. And then, the biggest question arises: who is Zodiac really? Is Zodiac really alive? In Zodiac Killer, is he still alive? True Crime Documentary, Part 5. We will continue to search for the final answer to this case, delving into new theories and important clues in order to end this long-running investigation. Don't miss it, because Part 5 will bring surprising answers. And time passed, but the Zodiac Killer case was still not over. Every day, investigators felt the weight and tension of an unsolved case. Clues, new and old, kept them lost in the maze of no way out. There are no clear traces, no convincing evidence, and no real arrests. However, in the world of criminal investigation, every battle was a big challenge, and that kept the Zodiac case on the agenda of analysts, cryptographers, and police investigators. With each clue, the case became more complicated. Old suspects lacked enough evidence to be convicted, and new suspects were just ghosts that the police could not grasp. But in the midst of all this deadlock, there was still hope. A few new investigative techniques, a few unproven theories, and above all, the relentless persistence of investigators have made small but important strides in the search for this legendary killer. Unlike any other murder case, the Zodiac case involved not just a crime, but also a psychological game. The letters, codes, and threats that Zodiac sent to the police and the press were not simply messages from a killer, but also puzzles and challenges that he posed to the entire legal system. Zodiac understood that if he could get the police and the public involved in this game, he would maintain control and power. One of the biggest questions for investigators remains, what did Zodiac want? Did he just want to kill, or did he have a larger purpose behind his actions? An interesting theory is that Zodiac was not a simple killer. He may have been someone who wanted to challenge the intelligence and judgment of investigators. Each code, each message was a challenge that he posed, forcing the police to chase after traces that could never be caught. Along with the analysis of the letters and codes, experts began to make new assumptions about the Zodiac's personality. They believed that Zodiac was not an anonymous killer, but could be a very intelligent person, capable of manipulating everyone around him. And if that was the case, the Zodiac case was not simply a hunt for a killer, but a battle of wits with a person whose motives and methods no one could fully understand. In 1980, after more than a decade of fruitless investigation, a major turning point appeared. Investigators began using fingerprint and DNA analysis to search for new leads. These technologies had not been fully utilized in previous years, and many experts believed that this was their chance to get closer to the Zodiac. It is worth noting that, although there had been some results from fingerprint and DNA testing in other cases, what investigators got from the Zodiac case was not convincing enough. Police could not find a single trace of Zodiac, and samples collected from the scene only led to ambiguous results. It was a big shock for investigators when they realized that they had not yet come any closer to arresting Zodiac. However, the development of technology and new methods of analyzing evidence helped open up new avenues. Although investigators could not conclude that Zodiac was the case, testing continued. New discoveries of old evidence and obscure specimens kept investigators hopeful of a breakthrough. When technology failed to help, investigators began to revisit old theories and re-examine all the suspects they had previously ruled out. Those who had been overlooked in the initial investigation were now being re-examined. Suspects such as Richard Gaikowski and Arthur Lee Allen continued to be scrutinized. Allen, who had been a prime suspect, was now being re-investigated because of his connections to the old cases. Despite the similarities between Allen and the Zodiac, there was not enough evidence to convict him. Investigations became even more difficult, as each suspect had their own story and motive, making it impossible to determine who was behind all the murders. With the advent of new technologies and data analysis, investigators are expanding their investigation. The unexplained evidence could be the key to solving the case. And maybe, one day, they will find out who Zodiac is. While the case remains unsolved, one thing is clear. The investigation has become into a psychological war. Zodiac is not just a simple killer, but a monster in the dark whom justice cannot reach. Every clue, every letter, every code is a step forward in the game he created. And the police, no matter how hard they try, are still just pawns in this game. With each failed investigation, they feel more tired. The letters, the codes, the endless murders all make them feel like they are being dragged into a game they cannot win. The closer they get to their target, the more tired they feel, and each step makes them more confused. However, one thing that no one can deny is the persistence of the investigators. They do not give up, do not stop. Although Zodiac may have killed people and sent provocative letters, every day, the investigators still keep searching. Although there is no clear answer, this persistence may pay off. Zodiac may still be alive, but he may not escape justice forever. So, is Zodiac still alive? What will the police do next in this investigation? These unanswered questions will be answered in Zodiac Killer. Is he still alive? True Crime Documentary, Part 5. Don't miss the chance to continue following the Zodiac case with us and get closer to the final answer. Watch Part 5, where all the clues will be revealed, and we will know if Zodiac is really still alive and lurking in the dark. In 2021, after more than 50 years of investigating the Zodiac case, when all hope seemed lost, a breakthrough came. The decades-long investigation, with countless suspects, theories, and deadlocks, was finally resumed with the advent of new DNA analysis technology. A new analysis method was applied to old evidence in the Zodiac case, opening a new path to solving one of the most mysterious and long-running murder cases in American history. This gave investigators an unprecedented sense of hope. Samples were re-examined and interviews with experts began to yield encouraging results. While the public and investigators knew that there would likely not be a clear conclusion immediately, developments in forensic science brought them closer to an answer they had waited so long for. The Zodiac murders were different from the usual murders. With each murder, he not only left behind physical traces, but also sent elaborate messages in the form of letters and codes. However, physical evidence at the scene, such as blood stains or fingerprints, was not enough for the police to conclude any suspects. With the advancement of DNA analysis technology, the police began to conduct a retesting of samples from old cases. This was a major turning point in the investigation of the Zodiac case. Although the results from these tests did not immediately identify the culprit, they created a new direction for the investigation. Investigators hope that with modern technology, they will finally be able to find the killer who has shocked America for decades. One of the unique features of DNA testing is the ability to identify DNA samples from crime scenes. Although the collected samples were not completely clear, with the help of new technology, investigators began to reconstruct the case from the beginning, which opened up a path they could not have expected. Although DNA analysis technology has helped create new steps, one thing that cannot be denied is that Zodiac's challenge still resonates in the minds of investigators. The letters he sent to the press and the police were still full of provocation, and over the years, those messages made people feel his joke. Zodiac did not kill people just to satisfy his criminal instincts, but also to demonstrate his power in a sophisticated game with those who try to track him down. He knew that any investigation would not be so easy, and his letters contained not only threatening messages, but also a kind of constant challenge. Despite the new leads, the question remains, who is Zodiac? Every time the police get close to a new suspect, he disappears into the darkness, creating a fog that no effort can penetrate. Vague details from suspects, shaky statements, all slowed down the investigation. Every step the police take seems to go in circles without achieving any results. Over the years, a series of theories have been put forward about who is behind the Zodiac name. Although the police have some notable suspects, no one has yet had enough evidence to convict. Some new theories have made the case even more complicated. Some believe that Zodiac was actually a lone killer, a man with mysterious motives, and very few people can recognize him. However, others believe that Zodiac may have been part of a criminal group with methods and motives more complex than anyone could imagine. The police have tried a variety of methods, from analyzing Zodiac's letters to examining samples at the scene. One of the big questions is whether Zodiac was truly someone with extensive knowledge of tactics and psychology, or was he simply a criminal who acted on impulse? None of these theories can answer the most important question: is Zodiac still alive? Does he continue to live in the shadows, or has he long since finished his crime game? This remains an unanswerable question, but progress in the investigation continues. Ultimately, after decades, it is undeniable that the Zodiac case remains one of the most unsolved mysteries. Investigations and advances in technology only complicate the questions. Police are faced not only with the killer, but also with political uncertainty. His motives. Although there are suspects being investigated and new clues being discovered, the ultimate question remains unanswered. Zodiac Killer. Who is he? Is he still alive? The answer remains unclear, and we may never know for sure. While the Zodiac story is still unfolding, we will move on to another case, no less mysterious and full of tension. The Springfield 3 Graduation Night Disappearance True Crime Documentary, Part 1, will take you on a journey to investigate a mysterious disappearance that has so far remained unsolved. Don't miss Part 1 of the Springfield 3, where we will begin the search for answers to one of the strangest and most fascinating disappearances in American history.